All right, guys. So today I'm super excited. We got Tom Bennett joining us. Tom, thanks for taking time out of your busy day. I know you got a bunch going on to chat with us.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Yep, it's
Yeah, so I know we were just kind of chatting before we started here about how we connected. Actually, the algorithm kind of served some of the content that you're putting out there up to me, and it's just, I mean, I think I commented back to you or sent you a DM. I was like, "This is the most underrated content, farming content on Instagram." I absolutely loved it.
yeah, thanks. I did read that comment. That felt good because it's like I've been saying that for years. So
I've been telling myself.
yeah, no, I just do stuff on there, and just for my own entertainment, really, and that's what might sit down if I get a half an hour at the end of the day to maybe watch Netflix before going to bed, and I'll never get to watching Netflix because I'll start making reels in CapCut or something from just the most mundane pictures or videos I have. And so
Yeah.
I'll end up doing that for 2 hours. So it's just my own entertainment, really. So
Yeah, I get it. So, share with me that Instagram handle so our listeners can check that out while they're listening.
yeah, it's Bennett Farms, Michigan, and we're on Instagram. Primarily, everything's done on Instagram, but we're also on Facebook at the same handle and TikTok. So
Super cool. So I was actually supposed to come up and see you. I know we connected about you possibly visiting the farm, and then I'm getting ready to launch the course. I know you've seen a bunch of the stuff that I've personally got going on, and I know flights went up a bunch, so we're gonna have to postpone the farm visits, and maybe I'll connect with you soon on that. But it looks like from the outsider looking in, you got a lot of really cool stuff going on. You've been at it a long time. Share with us a little bit about kind of how you got started and what you got going on up there.
yeah, so I came into farming after I got out of the Marine Corps. So I joined the Marines in 2001, and I was in until 2008 on active duty. So '01 to '08. Got out, came home. I had bought land when I was home on leave in 2005 up here in Michigan, and so I had that for a few years before I got out, and took a balloon loan on the land when I bought it. So I had like 3 years to pay it off, and I worked a couple of side jobs while I was in the military stateside to get that paid off. So that way, when I got out, I was able to build a house and start a farm. Um, yeah, so 2010, 2010, we built the house. 2012, we started raising animals just for our own consumption, just high quality meats for me and my family. And then just organically, word of mouth spread, and we started raising pigs specifically for other people. And within a few years, we were selling a lot of wholes and halves, things like that, to about 40 or 50 families a year. And then we did our first farmers market in 2016, I believe it was. And our first day there was a huge eye opener. I'm like, holy crap! Like I should have been doing this years ago. So we're
Yeah.
up to we gradually added and expanded. We do 10,000 broilers this season. We did 10,000 chickens. We did 450 pigs, 700 turkeys, and just a handful of beef because we're just now starting to dabble in beef. But we sold all that direct to consumer. We do 19 farmers markets a week, and then we sell online as well.
Wow, those are
Yeah,
some massive numbers.
yeah,
I don't know. Well, first of all, thank you for your service. I know you shared that earlier. And I don't know if I mentioned when we first connected that I actually have my own personal farm as well. I'm partnered with my brother and sister-in-law. We do pastured poultry, pastured pork, and some of the same things you talked about. Not at the scale you're doing them. We're in our second year here, so you've been at it quite a while, and it doesn't happen overnight. You're one of the first people I've talked to. Um,
yeah,
that 2010,
yeah.
that's quite a while ago.
So it was, 16 to 18, I still was working an off farm job. In 18, something had to give because I couldn't continue to, let my entire life suffer. Because when you're doing farming and you're building it and you're working an off farm job, like a lot of your relationships will suffer. You're farming by headlamp at night, and did that for a few years, but I came to a point where the farm got big enough that I had to make a decision. Either I had to chill out on the farming and scale back, or I had to quit my day job. So I ultimately ended up quitting my day job in 2018. So I've been farming full time as my income since then, since 18. And yeah, I mean, your goal, if you're wanting to get to full time farming, if that is your goal, some people don't have that as a goal. Some people just want to, raise enough animals to maybe pay for a nice vacation once or twice a year. It's just a side
Sure.
hustle. That's cool too. But I think the magic number for people to try and get to as fast as they can is 500,000 a year in sales. Because at 500,000 a year in gross sales, like you can support a decent life off that. Um,
Sure.
so that's kind of my 2 cents on as far as like
Yeah.
size and volume you should be shooting for if you want to make a full-time career out of it. So
Sure. Now, when you throw a number out there like that, like $500,000 in gross sales, I know obviously, that's not just counting profit, and you've got to have a profitable operation. Talking about going
mhm.
full time, what kind of advice, what kind of tracking numbers? How do you make sure that you're keeping profit when you're looking at the type of operation that you got?
Yeah, right. Because it's not about how much money you make; it's about how much money you keep. So
That's right.
just getting your margins right. I mean, when you sit down and lay out, depends on how you sell it too. Like most of our stuff is direct to consumer retail. Um, we don't do a ton of wholesale. We do service wholesale accounts that reach out to us, but we don't pursue them aggressively just because the margin's smaller on those. Um,
Sure.
so it's all done in the office. I mean, you got to look at all your input cost on the life cycle of that animal. Plus, you got to build in, your overhead for miscellaneous expenses like electricity and farm insurance and all these things. So we have a number, like say on a pig, for example, we know that on one hog, right, it's going to take us $450 to produce and slaughter that hog to be individually packaged for retail sale. Our numbers on what that hog sells for when we sell it cut by cut, like online or at a market, is going to be around 12 to 1400, depending on the cuts. If it's
Yeah.
brats or versus
Yeah.
ground sausage or whatnot. But so the
That's great.
450, that's
It's
that's our
amazing.
cost for feeding, butchering, and the feeder piglet. So say your 50-pound feeder pig, um, and then all of our other expenses like employee costs and farm insurance and all that. That's all coming out of that other nearly 900 or 1,000 on that hog that's left
Sure.
over. Um, so just make sure you get your numbers right. And I get asked by farmers all the time, like, where do I start? Like, I don't know how to price my stuff. Well, you know, you never so what I would recommend to them is get a hog back from the butcher, lay it out. You need to have a number in your head that you want to achieve for that animal to be worth doing, and then
Yeah.
start assigning prices to each cut. Maybe bacon's worth a little more, these hocks are worth a little less. Lay it all out on the table and get a grand total number. That's a good starting point.
Yeah.
Or my thinking has recently evolved, probably within the last 6 months. An easier answer is copy someone who's already figured out what good margins are and
Yeah.
just go to their website and just steal their prices to start with because
Sure.
they arrived at that for a reason. Like if you look at
Yeah.
my pricing or some of the other guys that do what I do, in the beginning you might say, well, that's crazy that their bacon's $13 a pound. Like I want to sell mine for 8. Well, you can do that. You're going to always be out of bacon, and eventually you'll get to being at 13 because that's what it's worth. You know what I mean? So you
Yeah.
could take a few years to get there, or you
Yeah.
could just start by imitating someone who already does what you do in a
Sure.
similar way because they arrived at those numbers for a reason.
Yeah.
Um,
I like
yeah,
the way that, you talked about laying out, like a whole pork like that and looking through the cuts. That's kind of how we did ours. I tell a lot of the people that work with me, because I talk about, price a little bit, is, your price is your price, right? Your price is going to be different than my price. The price that's costing you to raise those hogs, that's a great price. You're super efficient at that price. Obviously you're at a large scale. And so you're able to drive that price down. But for somebody else who can't produce it at that price, right? Their price is going to be the price they need to be profitable, like you said. So when they got those cuts laying there, they're like, hey, this is the number I need out of this to make it worth my time. And it kind of is what it is. And if we're trying to build a brand and one day, kind of follow in your steps, and go full time in it, like we've got to be profitable. And if we're not profitable, we're not sustainable. And if we're not sustainable, it's kind of all for nothing, right?
right. Yeah, and it all comes down to making money. I mean, at the end of the day, like you could do it for the environment or for animal welfare or better quality product. There's so many reasons why we do what we do. But at the end of the day, like you said, if you're not making money, you're not going to be doing it very long. So
That's right.
that should be one of the most important things to make sure that you got right. And you're right. We do have a competitive advantage being where we're located with our non-GMO inputs. Like I'm paying half of what guys in California are paying for that stuff, for the grain rations that
Yeah.
the hogs and the chickens are eating. So yeah, you're right in that aspect that our prices are pretty competitive just because of where we're located. But
Sure. Yeah.
um, yeah,
So
and
tell me,
don't. don't get in a price. You know, you don't want to be in a race to the bottom to try and gain market share. So I see a lot of times like new farms come in and they'll just, you know, they'll be selling ground pork for 4.85 a pound. I'm like,
Wow.
you're
Yeah.
not going to be here in a year, or like
Yeah.
something's going to, like, the
Yeah.
reason that they can do that and not realize this because they're so small that they won't go bankrupt in a month. If I
Yeah.
sold that for that price, I would have major problems within 30 days. You
Yeah.
know, so yeah, don't try and gain market share by just undercutting, you know, other people in your sector, because you'll just be the first one to go out of business.
Absolutely. So something I wanted to kind of dive into, I think it was really obvious to me, again, looking at your Instagram content, you are a hard worker. You've talked a lot about, I think in some of your reels you've made, like working late nights and doing what, you need to do and that sort of thing. And you've built this since, 2010 and, ultimately have gone full time in it. At what point, because you hear a lot of farmers talk about burnout, and when you were in that time period, like we are like, something's got to give, right? I mean, you're working that full-time job, you're farming with the headlamp. What kept you going? And then in the second part of that question, like what advice would you give to someone who's like they feel like they're almost there, and what pushes them over the edge?
Yeah, so two things on that. One, I see the Marines gave me a lot of, I guess you got to be kind of a person with a lot of grit to make it through that little hiccup, because it's pretty hard.
Yeah.
But the defining moment will come when you, I wouldn't say a mental breakdown, but you feel like you're going to lose it, because it's like, I can't, like, my wife hates me. I never see my kids. I'm out here in the middle of the night, like moving chickens in the dark. Like, and I think that there's going to come a point where you have to decide because you've gotten too big. But an easier answer is when you are losing money that you could have made on the farm because you have to leave to go fulfill your 9 to 5 commitment. So there got to be a point too where I would go to work and I would make $400 at work for the day, but I knew that I missed out on selling $1,000 worth of meat that day. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Or I had piglets that started farrowing an hour to go. Well, I gotta leave. I gotta go. I can't sit here all day. I hope they don't need pull. You know, and then I come
Yeah.
home to 14 dead piglets. It's like I shouldn't have went to work today. You know, couldn't afford to go to work today. I just lost what I made by going. So it
Yeah.
became a wash. It's like, you know, so that was kind of one of those moments too, where it's when you know you could have made more today by staying home and working on your business, whether it be sending out an email. Email is a great email is like getting money from an ATM machine. Like right now, I could spend an hour and craft a great email to my customer list, and it's going to produce thousands of dollars in sales within the next 3 days, guaranteed. Like once you have at least 1,000 people on your email list, that's a good starting point for it to work. Like every time, like it's guaranteed sales. But once you start getting many thousands of people, it is. It's like, oh well, I want to buy a box van, you know, in 3 weeks. I better send out a couple emails and it'll pay for it. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, like,
Yeah.
so once you get to a point to where you could be doing things to market and sell meat or products, you know, even if it's veg, and make the same that you could at your day job, that's when it's time to, I guess.
Yeah,
So
I guess it kind of tells you when it's time in that aspect.
yeah,
I love that you kind of started talking about email right there. Obviously I do the marketing stuff. I know we haven't connected a ton on what I do and kind of what I'm offering to help with farmers, but I talk a lot about email marketing. Something I throw out at clients, and this is by no means universal. This is obviously there's a ton of variables to this. I just kind of tell people this to give them an idea about what email marketing can do for them and give them some baselines. But I tell them that around about 1,000 email contacts can equal roughly $100,000 in gross farm sales. Okay, so there's a
hmm
ton of variables to that. But once we kind of, like you said, get to those numbers, depending on what we're selling, whole and half animal deposits or cuts. I mean, again, ton of variables, right? But like you've already kind of attested to, once you have that database and you can kind of push that button, you're going to get those sales. What advice would you give? I know you do a lot of farmers markets, so I'm sure you're collecting a ton of emails. But what else has worked for you other than just collecting emails at the farmers market?
yeah. So collecting emails too. Another incentive, if you have employees like I do, where we have 7 farmers markets going simultaneously, sometimes on Saturday and Sunday. we pay our employees $1 per email that they collect as an incentive. So, and there's no cap on that. So that really boosts our email collection. Like we have one guy, he was a superstar at collecting emails. He could get 100 emails at every market he went to every single day. Like his only limiting factor on how many emails he would collect is how many email sheets we sent him with. So he got fed up with email sheets and he
Yeah.
started taking his own copies of sheets because he was tired of running out. So he was making an
Nice.
extra $100 a day collecting emails because we pay $1 an email. And it's worth way more than that to me because these are high quality emails from customers who are already into local food shopping at markets. It's not like you're just buying a spam email list, off
Yep.
the dark web or something, because that's going to be pretty cold emails.
That's right.
um so collect, what was the question? I'm sorry, you might have to edit that, but
Yeah, no, so we're talking about, some things that had worked for you in collecting emails, just
collecting
in that
emails. Yeah.
process, yeah.
So employee incentives to collect those, or for you, and it's not just people that are buying from you. It's anybody who passes, looks at you at them. Hey, how you doing? Are you on our email list yet? Let me tell you about it. So customer journeys too. Like we set up customer journeys on our emails. So that way, once once we load them into our email, app, our email software, they'll get automated emails. Like first one comes like the day we loaded in, the second one comes 2 weeks later, then 3 weeks
Sure.
later. And so they could be emails about our subscription bundles or about, you know, um, it's just products we offer, things we do, or if we write, it kind of stinks sometimes when you spend a couple hours crafting a really amazing email that's not time sensitive. It's just a, a general purpose. Like this would be relevant anytime to anyone, type of email.
Yep.
Well, you could add that into your journey deck somewhere. And so that way everybody in your email list gets it, and it's not just whoever was on your email list that month. So going forward, it would get to be reused. So you get to recycle that content. But yeah, when
Absolutely.
I first started my farm, that was a question that was asked to me is, well, what's your email list look like? Send that over to me. And I'm like, email list? Like, dude, was this like 1990? Like, do
Yeah.
people still use emails?
Yeah.
And I didn't believe it. And then once I started doing
Yeah.
this, I'm like, fine, all right, I'll collect emails. And now it's
Yeah.
like, holy crap.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
No, I love that you said that. I definitely have sentiment with you in that. I think when I was I actually, so a little background on me, about 10 years ago, I started a pressure washing business. It's the first business I ever started. Long story short, a couple of years, I scaled it to several service trucks, several employees, and was able to sell that business. But same story, when I started, it was like oh, collect emails. I'm like, it's 2000 like 10, 12. I'm like, I'm not collecting email. And I just got out of college. I'm like, I'm not collecting emails, right? And then you learn that like people are so hardwired to be in that sales process when they get an email, right? And I think that's what's so much different than social media, right? When they're on social media, maybe they're going to the bathroom, they're in the drive school line, like they're laying in a sofa, right? And they're scrolling. They're not really thinking buying, they're thinking entertainment, which is kind of sad for our society we live in, but just kind of the world it is. But then when they're in that email mindset, like they're used to seeing things that like, are important. They're more business minded. Maybe they're purchasing. So I think you're catching someone at a time where their mindset is more geared towards purchasing, and like they perform really well. The emails you send out are going to be seen. It's not like Facebook and Instagram where the algorithm could like suppress them because you're trying to sell something, right? Everyone on that list is going to see it. They're going to have a chance to buy it. It's something that they care about. Like you said, they're already connected to the local food scene. So I've talked to several farmers that, they had the same thing. They're like, oh, emails, that can't work. That can't be as simple as it is.
Yeah, and even if the customer that sees that email doesn't buy anything, you just got put to the top of the shuffle in their brain that day. I mean, so there'd be thousands of people that thought about your farm for at least 1 second that day that otherwise wouldn't have. And so they may have a conversation in the car pickup line where a lady says, "I wish I knew a local farm I could buy meat from," and she's like, "Oh yeah, Bennett Farms," or your farm's name.
Oh yeah.
Um,
I mean, that right there is huge. And at the end of the day, you're feeding into, that's word of mouth. And this is, something I tell all my clients is, word of mouth is king. It's always going to be king, no matter what fancy marketing stuff we come up with. But we look at all these other things like a spoke in the wheel, right? It's like, your website's not the key. It's not necessarily just the farmer's market or just the emailing. It's how they all work together. I'm sorry, you good?
there.
Hey, you back?
Yeah, yeah, that was crazy. I think my internet dropped out, so
Oh, no worries.
I switched it over to a different server. So it'll be.
Oh, you're good.
Sorry, you said
All good,
so.
man.
At the
So,
last thing I heard
um,
from you was so at the end of the day, we were talking about emails. Are you going to lose that whole
yeah.
recording from the
So
beginning?
I was kind of no, I still got it. I'm still rolling over here.
Okay. All
Nope,
right. Go ahead.
I got it. So where I started to kind of die because you mentioned that lady, she's in the carpool line. I think you said, she gets that email and then someone asked her a question, hey, do you know about a local farm? And you were on the top of her brain, so she shares about your farm, right? And so I was kind of diving into, now you're getting into that word of mouth piece, and I was like, word of mouth is king. And I kind of tell everyone when we look at all this marketing stuff, whether it's emails, websites, farmers markets, they're all like spokes in a wheel, right? And we got to have them all to kind of be functioning properly to get that whole machine moving down the road. And at the end of the day, word of mouth is it's the big driver. And like you said, if we can help build that through emails or whatever that looks like, we're definitely moving in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah. And then back in our early days when we first started out, we were doing direct mailers. Like we were filling them out by hand at our kitchen table and mailing out like flyers. And I think my return on that was I had to sell one
Wow.
half hog at least minimum for every 500 I sent out just to break even. So if I sold two, I made money. You know what I mean? So it was like, and that was way back
Wow.
before our
Yeah.
email
That's
days.
great though. But you build what you got. And I think, that's just kind of a strategy thing there. Obviously it takes some push and pull. I mean, you want to be profitable from the
Mhm.
beginning as early as possible, but at some point you definitely have to invest. You definitely have to be willing to, maybe not make money up front on something so you can build somewhere else over here, or you can scale this part of your operation. We want to be careful about how much we do that because it's tough to get off that wheel sometimes. But it's part of it. Yeah. So, Tom, I wanted to, obviously being up there and being able to see the scale of your operation, some of the numbers that you talked about. I was super intrigued in that piece, just to see how you did what you did with the numbers that you're talking about. I mean, raising 10,000 broilers, that's unbelievable, to my mind as a pasture poultry producer, and just where I am. And we'll raise a few thousand birds this year, but 10,000 is a whole nother ball game. And so I would have loved to see some of that production side. Tell me just a little bit about what you think would be the biggest takeaways as far as scaling production of kind of boots on the ground.
Yeah, so it's about replication. I mean, just you figure out what method works for you. Like our batches are 1,000 in size. We tried doing 1,500 bird batches, and that was no good. Too much piling, too much. If you have one bad day, you can lose 500 birds in like an hour. So stick with your smaller batches and just replicate it. One thing too, advice for people getting into this is when I first started, I would hear about farms raising 1,000 birds or 2,000 birds, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I can't imagine selling 1,000 birds in a year direct to consumer. Like, how do you even get there? It just seems so far. This is when I
Yeah.
starting out with a few hundred, and and going from 0 to 1,000 or 0 to 2,000 is way harder than going from 2,000 to 10,000. So just in that first couple thousand birds that you're doing, you're learning how to build a customer base. You're building a reputation. You're figuring out your sales channels. And then after that, it's easy. So don't think that every thousand is as hard as the first was. Once you get to a few thousand, then from there it's exponentially easier
Sure.
to grow. Um,
Sure.
with scaling. So also, depends on what your method is. If you're purely online, like we wouldn't survive without e-commerce online. I wouldn't be a full-time farm. Even with the 19 farmers markets we do a year, um, there throughout the summer, we do 7 in the winter, 19 in the summer per week. If I didn't have online sales like in the winter, I would have to get a day job. Like there's just because of the cash flow thing, it can't
Yeah.
stop. We got to have cash flow. Um,
Yeah.
and so being online is really important. But say if you do a farmer's market, right, and you're like, maybe your local market does $1,000 in sales, in 6, 7 hours, whatever the time is. So figure out what your margin is for profit on that. Maybe you're only clearing $300 because say if you sell $1,000 worth of meat, three or 400 of it's going to go to replace the product that you sold, right? So now you're at 600. So the 600, say you might be working for free, but you need to make sure you can pay an employee to do it, right? Because we shouldn't be working for free. And if your excuse is, well, I can't afford to pay someone to do this for me, then you shouldn't be doing it yourself either. Because if you can't afford to pay someone to do it,
Yeah.
then you shouldn't be doing it, you know? So that's a clear red flag. Um, so once you work in your employee cost, maybe your market fees, your fuel, those things, maybe you made a couple $100 net profit on that market for the day. Okay, you can't live on that. That's not enough, right? So now you just got to do 8 markets a day.
Yeah.
That's all it is, you know. So it's that's why we do 19 a week. But then you get into metropolitan areas, and that's where the money's. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made in a city of 7 million people. So you can do 6 times your normal local sales if you're willing to drive maybe a couple hours extra each way to a huge city. Um, and that's kind of what we
That's
in
awesome.
yeah. So but yeah, replicate
Yeah. No, that's
whatever's
great
working,
stuff.
replicate it, you know, and you'll be all right. So you just gotta, yeah.
One on that production side, it looks like you're raising a lot of your broilers outside on grass in like a poultry netting, or even just on in pasture, not inside like typically what you see, a chicken tractor or some type of mobile shelter. Two part on that. Did you start with chicken tractors, and then what got you to put them in the poultry, and maybe some pros and cons of that type of operation?
Yeah. So, with pastured poultry, the thing there is you need to move it on fresh pasture every day. Like that's what makes pastured poultry pastured poultry. You know, it's not dirt lot poultry, so you got to have movement. And we did start out when we were, below a thought. Well, we went up to like 2000, still using like the 10 by 12, like Salatin style. It was a variation of that. It was more of a hoop poultry thing that we were pulling around, but we got up to like 13 of them. And it was the water was the issue because those birds would go through so much water. That became like the limiting factor. So we went with bigger. We do use chicken tractors too. So we got some chicken tractors that are like, I built one this year that's 18 by 40. It works, but when it's hot out, it's hard to get the birds to move. So the netting, what you're seeing a lot of times on Instagram, that's our overflow. Because we'll have on any given day, uh, 3,000 to 4,000 birds on our farm, like during the main production season. So we run out of chicken tractors. I would like to. There's some really good chicken tractors out there, but it's just from a money standpoint, it can be 15 to $20,000 for those big chicken tractors that hold 600 birds. Well, I need two of them per
Yeah.
bed. I need six of those, so that's like 70 grand, right? For those
Yeah.
items. And with the outdoor method where they have shelters and we move that every other day, we just drag the feeders and they follow, to a fresh area. We do have some predation with owls and hawks, but even if we lose 3 chickens a day to predation, you can do that for a long time before you get to $70,000 in losses. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not ideal. I mean, we're doing that with netting just because we're running what we brung. With our growth has been fast, and whenever we get our hands on an excess 20 grand that's not earmarked for anything, it's like we've been, we need to put in more freezers, or maybe we need another box truck, or there's just always things that seem more important than the fancy chicken tractors that hold 600 birds because we can make do without it. But
Yeah.
eventually we'll get those bigger ones. But and our farm is there's not a lot of straight flat areas. Like I can't go for 20 acres in a straight line. Like I'm constantly having to turn and stuff, and that's
Yeah.
bad with those because you do lose birds every time you turn, unless you've got a big crew with you that can help keep them away from the edges. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where we're at on that. But we do use both. I would have them all in chicken tractors, but and it wouldn't be that much. I amortized it out one year. I'm like, it only cost me 50 cents a bird for 5 years to pay for all those. It's a good
Wow.
deal. It ain't
Wow.
bad.
Yeah.
But
No, that's not bad.
but there's just always I like to spend money on things that are going to make me more money. And that doesn't really do that as much as some other things that we invest in um, on our farm. So yeah.
Yeah,
That's
no,
another thing I would tell people, like, if you're new to this and you're buying like $20,000 UTVs and all this crazy stuff, brand new Kubota tractors and all this, like, that's probably not the smartest thing. I mean, why would you buy a $20,000 side by side when you could buy a Ford Ranger for 2 grand? They're going to do the
yeah,
same thing on your farm.
that's
You know,
very,
you
very true.
need and you could use that other $18,000 to grow your production, like in an area that makes more sense. You know, maybe a licensed egg washing area or another walk-in freezer, so you can, that was one of the big growth things on our farm too. Is in the beginning we were limited in production by how much freezer capacity we had. Well, I didn't have the funds or it wasn't on my plans to put in, massive freezer buildings or anything. So what helped us was we were able to find cold storage in our region, where they just charge you, at the time it was $12 a month per pallet to
Got it.
drop off, so we could overproduce, and then put it in cold storage and then pull it out and come back and fill up the farm as needed. So we weren't limited by our freezer capacity. So
Yeah. That's great. No, I've actually had, to do that myself, and that's a great way to kind of, kind of cripple along that growth, right, and just kind of let it keep going. I noticed on your Instagram page you have, let me see, I believe it's 2021 Conservation Farmer of the Year. Is that right?
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So up here in Michigan, our state has what's called the MEAT program. It's Michigan Environmentally Verified Assessment Program, and we are an environmentally verified farm through the state. And the state, they came out to do a tour of my farm. It was in 2021, and I just thought they were just doing like a reinspection or whatever. And they walked around, looked at everything, and then on the way out the door, they were like, "By the way, you're in the running for Conservation Farm of the Year." I'm like, "Oh, sounds cool. Let me know how that goes." And we won it. So a few months later, we got the call that we were awarded that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was pretty cool for our area. We really milked that in our marketing stuff. So anytime
Yeah.
you can use something like that for marketing, it's always a plus because it allows you to differentiate yourself from maybe some other people that do the same thing you do. So
Yeah.
it's nice.
Yeah, no, it looks like you guys have some really cool things going on. I hate that I didn't get to see it in person, but maybe we can reconnect in the spring on that. I think you've shared a lot of really valuable things,
Yeah, yeah, it'd be good.
answers, a lot of answers and things that are super encouraging, I think, for farmers that are, maybe they're in that squeeze point. They're in those transition years. They're in those, years wearing the headlamp, working, late at night and, kind of grinding through things right now. And to hear from someone that's done it, I think super valuable. And it's, kind of want to thank you for your time. I kind of wrapped up here unless you got anything else you want to share with us.
No, I think that'll do it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Anytime you want to
absolutely.
talk, just give me a call back.
Before we close out, if you would again, maybe just share that URL for the website, share that Instagram page or anything else that someone can check you out.
Yeah, our website's Bennett Farms Michigan at Gmail, and our Instagram is at Bennett Farms Michigan as well. So all of our stuff's Bennett Farms Michigan.
Awesome. Well, Tom, thank you again for your time. We appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks. Have a good one.